Hello. We should be live now. Hello to everyone in the comments. Thank you for tuning in. We've got quite a few people over on YouTube. And we're also monitoring Facebook and Twitch as well. So how's everyone doing? Thanks to everyone who tuned in last week. This is part of a new thing that we're doing on ADSR on a Monday, and it's a sound design sessions with myself. For anyone new, I'm Brent March. I'm a composer, producer, and sound designer, and I have the pleasure of hosting a live stream here every Monday at 6 p.m. UK time. I believe that is 10 for people in the USA, and probably 1 hour ahead for people in Eastern Europe. Well, actually Central Europe as well. So if anyone has any questions or anything for this session or future sessions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we can definitely look at them. The plan for today is to explore Multiphonics CV-1, which is a modular synthesis engine. It's a virtual modular synthesis engine. And basically, we're going to look at the beginnings of it because I think that modular synthesis, quite a mouthful there, it's quite tricky to understand and maybe even more so in the virtual realm. But thanks to stuff like Multiphonics CV-1, and I've also had a little bit of experience with VCV, that was it, yeah. It's a good way to learn without having to physically own modular hardware. So we'll be diving into Multiphonics today for a beginner's sort of standpoint. And yeah, if hopefully everything's okay with the video capture and the audio on the mic and also the audio on my Studio One session. Shout out to anyone who's using Studio One. I know we're building a bit of a community at the minute. So hopefully that's working. I'll just wait for 1 or 2 more people and then we'll kick things off in literally a minute. The plan for today is we're going to build a basic patch, but try and learn all about the modules in CV1 from Multiphonics, and we're going to build a basic patch, look at the routing and how we can basically feed different modules into each other and how we can sort of get certain sound effects and certain sound design capabilities. And we'll probably do that for the first 30 to 45 minutes. And then what we'll do is, because I've had a little look through, some of these presets are absolutely outstanding. And it's a really good way to learn modular synthesis, is look at other people's patches, because it's very illustrative and you can see what's going on. So first sort of half an hour to 45, we will look at building basic patch, but still it'll sound quite familiar to a lot of people, sort of like a Moog or a Moog, depending on where you're from, type sound. And then in the last sort of 20-15 minutes, we'll be taking questions and we'll be looking at some of the awesome presets that come here. So for anyone tuning in, thanks a lot for tuning in, guys. Make sure to like the video if you like this content and turn the bell notification on if you want to be notified from these free monthly streams every single Monday. Hello to people in the comments. Hello, Michael. Miracle Guy, apologies. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll be getting going in just a moment. Hello to everyone as well on Facebook and Twitch. Thank you for tuning in. Let us know where you're coming from. And yeah, let's have a look at what we're working with here. This was just an initial patch that I pulled up, and we'll look at this again more so towards the end of the stream. But if we have a listen, it's quite remarkable, the sounds that are on show. Actually, if you have listened to, this was cool. If anybody's seen Nils Fram or heard Nils Fram, I seen him live and there was a song that sounded just like that. It was really cool. Maybe it was Says or something. Really, really cool. So, obviously, looking at this, it's quite an advanced patch. So we're not going to be doing anything like that today, but you can understand how you can get to this probably by the end of this sound design session. So let's begin. So it's actually a very nice interface that we have here with Multiphonics CV-1. We have different panes along the top here, and if I extend it out here, we also have 2 effects on the side, delay and reverb. Another nice thing is, if we see down here, it's really quite light on CPU usage, so there's not much to complain about, if anything. I'll close that side view. This side view here allows us to actually do no sound from... sorry guys, 1 second. Give me 2 seconds. Let's have a look at what we have going on here. I've been told that there might be no sound from the VST. Oh, that's a real bummer. It's coming through to my OBS. Let's have a look at what we can do here. Studio One sound. Give me 2 seconds, guys. Are people able to hear sound? Okay. Can people hear me now? This is so strange. I've not had this many issues, I must admit. Hello, hello, 1, 2. Can anyone hopefully hear any audio coming through? 1, 2, 1, 2. Still can't hear you speaking. Synth. Here's the synth. Can people hear the vocal? 1, 2. Hello. Can anyone hear the voice? Hello, 1, 2. Just let me know in the chat if we're in, if hopefully this is working. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, okay. Can you, okay, so people can hear the mic. Can people hear the synth as well? I'm very, very sorry about this, people. I'll run the stream over for an extra 5-10 minutes. Okay. Okay, people can hear synth, people can hear voice. Okay. Oh, we've got lovely, lovely people in the comments. So that's very, very good. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to run over for anyone else who's tuning in, just given the technicalities there. Okay, that's a relief. Okay, okay. The modern world of technology. Apologies. Right, let's get into it. So, now we can hear the synth and we can hear my voice. This is the patch I was describing before. And I'm going to show you basically the interface and how we can look at the modules and build a simple patch, but that'll give you a basic understanding as how you can make more complex signals. So I think when people said that there was an issue with the voiceover and the synth, I was trying to show here on the side we have delay and reverb, as well as some settings, and the CPU usage is very low, which is nice. Off to the left we have our features and stuff, but the main focus for the first 30 to 45 is we're going to be creating a simple patch and learning about the actual features and the modules. So I go to new patch here, and it just starts us off with a blank canvas. So let's have a look at the modules. If you actually look at the modules here, they are categorized into, you got generators, clocks and sequencers, CV generators, so they're control voltage generators, which we'll get into. And we have filters, mixers, signal processors, VCAs, and also visualizers. I think the best way to explain modular synthesis, because I know a lot of people in this community here will be familiar with serum and pigments, I can already see people in the comments, is we'll think about the individual modules as things that we might have seen in some of our favorite wavetable synthesizers, like serum, pigments, vital, stuff like that. So if we start off with, let me have a look, classic VCO. So I get absolutely no sound, and no, that's not a technical issue on OBS anymore. That's because we haven't rounded it. So what I could do is I could send the output of one of these waveforms. So to begin with, classic VCO. What this is, I know a lot of people are saying that they're familiar with modular synthesis, but they really just don't understand it, and I can completely empathize with you and understand why. But once you break it down into individual modules, that'll all start to make sense. So classic VCO outputs, we have a sub-oscillator. Now we've just got different waveforms here. You'll have seen these in serum, and essentially these are just going to project different sounds. Think of them almost like different instruments. Each one's got a different timbre and a different sound. What I can do is I can take the output directly to the actual output module at the top. By the way, this will always be here, the master clock, macros, output, and keyboard. And it's just, they're the things that are constantly peripherals that you need in order to be able to create patches. So let's take the output into here. I'll bring that down because it's a little bit sharp. So let's bring it down completely. As you heard, hopefully, given what happened before, as you heard, there is a sound there if I bring the output back up. But it's not controllable via my keyboard because it's not receiving control voltage information, and it's also not receiving MIDI to trigger it, and also it doesn't have an envelope, and it also doesn't have something to shape the sound. So that's what we're going to look at, is how can we actually build on this. It's actually known as subtractive synthesis, and it's like the basics of subtractive synthesis. Once we get some modules going, it actually starts to sort of look like a Model D mini Moog, like, you know, the really, really famous synth from Moog. It starts to sort of take on that format of basic subtractive synthesis. So after this, what I would do is I would add a voltage controlled amplifier. So we have to go down to our, they'll be in the VCA section. Okay, here we also have a nice visual representation as well. So when we click on a different module, you get an idea as to what it is. For now, we don't need a dual VCA, but imagine a dual VCA is almost like two VCAs together, sort of more for like stereo, and if you wanted to build polyphony. But we'll start off with the basic CV, and what we need to do now is we actually need to be able to tell the VCO here that we need to receive information from my MIDI keyboard, and also we need this VCA here to actually react to the keyboard up here. So you see keyboard. What I did was, before I started, by the way, this patch is here. This is the patch that we're going to be building, but I want to go through and add them additionally and explain all of the actual modules, what they do, and then you can go away and build them yourself. And you can grab this in the description on the ADSR website. I know it's quite a new piece of software, so it's really cool time to get into it as well. So this is what we are building. So let's go back to here and my patch here. What we're going to do is, instead of sending the output of the waveform here to the actual output and just getting a constant volume, I'm just going to cancel that, and I'm going to send the output into the input of the VCA. Now, still getting no sound at all. So what I need to do is I now need to send this to the gate, and then I send this to the left output. And again, we have, give me a second, that should have connected there. There we go. So what happened there was we did have the routing correct. We had the VCO, so the voltage controlled oscillator was going to the VCA, the voltage controlled amplifier. And the voltage controlled amplifier was going to the output, but we didn't have any signal because I wasn't getting, I dragged the CV to the gate, but the line didn't connect. So basically what happens now is this keyboard module at the top. Now, before, the notes would just constantly ring out. Now they actually are going to play for a duration based on how long I hold them down on the keyboard. So you see, that's one thing. Now what do we need to do now? We need to tell the keyboard, well, we need to tell the VCO to react to the keyboard's pitch information, because watch, it's playing the same thing all the way across the MIDI information. So we go back to our keyboard and we're going to tell it to tell the VCO pitch information. So we're starting to get musical instrument sounds now, as you can imagine. Albeit it's quite a harsh sound, and that's why we have to keep adding modules to, it's basically a subtractive synthesis process. Anyone who tuned in last week to the Pigments sound design tutorial, subtractive synthesis is basically where you have, it's a funny thing, it's basically a wall signal, electricity that comes from the wall, and you take things away from the actual signal that is generated from electricity, and by removing stuff, you are basically creating your own tailored sound. There's also additive synthesis, which we looked at last week, so that video, if you want to go and watch it, is on the channel. So, I now have pitch controllable, and I also have time and length based on how I'm playing. And that's because in the keyboard module, the pitch has been routed down to the pitch here in the classic VCO, and the gate has been sent to the VCA. Down here, the input and the output, this is quite a continuous thing with the next modules we'll look at. We seem to just patch from one to the other. If anyone has had any experience with guitar pedals, it's a good way to think of it, is like, you think of it like guitar pedals. You'll come out and into another, out and into another, and eventually you'll have to send the signal into sort of like an amplification system to actually give you the sound. But in essence, pedal boards and pedals are a bit like modular synth. So what I would do now is I'd probably put some sort of filter, because we have the pitch information, we have the time information, but it's just a little bit bitey. It's a little bit harsh on the ear, if I'm completely honest. So state variable filter, that is the most, it's probably like the most common filter that a lot of people have seen on other devices. Again, if you want to think of this in terms of like wavetable synthesis, a bit like Serum and Pigments and Vital, your VCO is basically when you load up one of the boxes on Serum, it's like that box there where you pick your waveform and you can detune it and stuff like that. You can have two of them in Serum. So that's basically what that is. It's a different GUI, a different graphic interface. So now what I need to do is I need to take my signal and I need to go from VCA and go into the state variable filter. And now we're starting to get into stuff that again is becoming more and more familiar for people who might look at modular synthesis and go, what is going on? And really, it's actually, I wouldn't say it's easy to understand, but when you break it down into the fundamental modules, it's basically, you have basically like 5 to 10 fundamental modules, and then all it is you just stack them, and you build on them, and you create more and more, and you can get more advanced sounds, and that's why some of the patches are a great way to learn, which we'll look at towards the end. So now I've got the oscillator. Think of the oscillator as just like a pure raw sound that's been fed into this VCA, and the VCA allows me to control the time with my keyboard, and I'm telling the keyboard module up here to inform the pitch based on, again, the keyboard. Now I'm going into the state variable filter. So state variable filter, in layman's terms, basically if you had an EQ, you would have like a ladder pole filter is the most common thing. Basically, that's like the roll off on either the low pass or the high pass filter, and you can go all the way from sort of like 12 dB per octave, which means if you were to look at an EQ, people in like FL Studio or Serum, you have like a 12 dB slope on an EQ, but you can go all the way up to 96, and basically it's just a way of getting rid of more and more fundamentals and harmonics. So what I can do is I can, if I have to cut off all the way down here, you can just hear it if you have headphones on, like just hear it. This is not a OBS streaming issue. It's all the way down at 16 Hertz, so subsonic basically. I'm starting to sweep through the EQ or the frequency spectrum. Now that I'm all the way up here, this is exactly what it sounded like before we actually put this module in, because it's not affecting it anymore, which is just a bit harsh. So I'll bring my cutoff back a little bit, and basically what that does is it's just sweeping the top end, in this case, off the sound. And you can change this down here: high pass, band pass. Band pass is like a filter, like a triangle. High pass would be if you were letting all of the highs pass through and getting rid of the lows, but in this case, getting rid of all the top end stuff. The Q, some people are always bewildered by what the Q is. So basically the Q Thing with modular synthesis is because it's modules and you don't have like an actual EQ to analyze everything, you can't actually have a visual representation. Although in Multiphonics CV-1, we do have some visualizers which might allow us to do that. But anyway, the Q, imagine you have your EQ curve, and a Q is basically you can tighten the amount of the bump, and the bump will boost a certain frequency. So you'll be able to hear what this does. It actually starts to get really sort of honky when you boost it that much. And that's when things in the mixing stage is like, people are like, oh, I need to attenuate that boxy or that resonant or that honky frequency, all these terminologies that get thrown around in mixing. Basically, the Q there, it could be a little bit too much. So I dial that back. But if you actually have Q, if you engage your Q and you bring it up, you give it a little bit more presence and a bit more bite. It almost vocalizes the EQ a little bit, you know? And you could modulate the Q with something like a low frequency oscillator, an LFO, which I'll show you after this. Or you can modulate the cutoff. Really simple to do in here, and it's actually quite a good way. It makes sense. So there we go. Cutoff, Q, growl. We're already 3 modules in, and I think everyone's following, and it's quite simple to understand. VCO, VCA, state variable filter. The growl is actually not very typical of a filter, but basically this is just a way of fattening it up and giving it some distortion. I think it also adds some harmonics, because when I did this, it seemed to add some sort of, like, it was adding some intervals. I think it's adding lower octave, 12 semitones down. We'll leave that for now, but we'll bring that back in later on because it sounds really, really cool. It's an advanced sound design tool at the heart of Multiphonics CV-1, but again, I think there's a cool way we can learn from it and build our own patches, and that's what I want people to go away with today from today's sound design session, is understand how to build their own patches with it, because modular synth is confusing, and it can be a little bit more confusing in a virtual domain. So there we go, classic VCO, VCA, add a filter. Now, if we keep with the theme of adding modules one by one, I would say I'd add an LFO. So an LFO, it's a funny one. An LFO, it's a low frequency oscillator. We've got an oscillator at the start here, classic VCO. That's a voltage controlled oscillator. So you would think an LFO would make a sound. I think you can get them to self-oscillate, but for the purposes of this demonstration, an LFO is actually typically used to modulate another source. Again, trying to keep this as simple as possible for this first sound design session in modular. What that means is I could get this module to basically say to something else, do this. So I could tell LFO, I could get LFO1 to say to the filter, open the cutoff a little bit like this, and I'll show you exactly how we could do that. So again, if you see these shapes, it's like the output shapes here. They are, again, just wave shapes. If I assign this to one of these here is actually a control voltage point or a CV point, or even easier for people who have grown up in the digital domain, just like myself, in terms of like serum. More modules is getting worse. In terms of stuff like serum and pigments, it's basically a modulation point. So what I'm doing is LFO is modulating the cutoff, and I can control how it modulates that cutoff using this module. All I'm doing is connecting it here to tell it that I want it to react to it. So if I pull this down, it'll no longer... It'll not do it as fast because I haven't got it at full 100%. But we have more control over that in the LFO. All of these are patch points. So I believe this patch point here, arrow facing cutoff, that would affect the cutoff. If I then did the same for the Q, now it's modulating the Q. Getting a little bit more advanced than I wanted to, so let's just leave that for now. Stick with LFO, modulating the cutoff. And so how can I change this? How can I make it a little bit more interesting? Well, what I could do is, the rate is something really cool. So what it's doing there is it's modulating the cutoff, and the cutoff is moving, even though we can't see it, it's moving left and right, and it's opening up the frequency spectrum. Cool for bass sounds. And if I pull the Q back, we'll get just like more of a growly subby sound. There we go, LFO. So still fairly straightforward. And again, I can go back and alter modules once I've added other modules. So if I boost the rate up now, you won't hear the rate as much because the module is actually boosted. The cutoff is boosted all the way up. You can still hear it. Now it'll modulate it in a negative parameter. You see negative 34. Here's 34. So this way, this means that the LFO would modulate the cutoff of the filter from, you see the white dot, from the white dot round to the end of the knob. If I pull this back, a negative value, now it'll go backwards. So it's taking it right back there. And we're almost creating like a sequence, like an actual rhythm there, aren't we? Pretty cool, actually. 4 modules. We've literally got a VCO, VCA, filter, and LFO. Let's bring this back. If I double click, it'll bring it back to 0. And now we have the VCO, the VCA, the filter, the LFO. What's missing? The most common thing, and the name of this channel is ADSR. So let's get our ADSR in there. So the ADSR, what does this do? Well, instead of actually affecting the oscillator in terms of its frequency and the actual frequency range that it occupies, and then, for example, what we did there was the LFO, we told it to modulate the frequency's filter cutoff. So basically it moved it around. It felt like it was creating movement. The ADSR actually changes the shape of these outputs here. So these waveforms, what it'll do is if I have the attack really short, the waveform will just hit straight away. If I don't, if I have a slower attack, it'll be a gradual blend into it. So that's another thing, basically. So again, I could do this in a couple of ways, and we'll have time to look at both of these, to be honest. What I could do is I could get the ADSR to just change the shape of the waveform. I could actually put it here, and I could go into the ADSR, and then I could come out of it into the VCA. We will do that. I think what would be a better way of showing it, since we're on the modulation route, because sometimes that's where modular synths can become hard to understand, is the modulation points. All of these big knobs are quite simple to understand, really, like tuning, cutoff. These are just functions for sort of time-based algorithms. And again, these are just sort of, imagine you're shaping something. When people get confused, there's these little macro, well, they're not macros, but these little modulation sources here can get confusing. So what I'll do is, this is actually a negative ADSR. See, it's pointing down. This is a positive. I'll take the positive shape and bring it over to the modulation source of cutoff. What I can do is I can affect the shape of the cutoff of the classic VCO. So let's have a listen. So we're actually just hearing it currently affected by when the LFO is affecting the filter. What I need to do is bring the gate over here. Now we hear the ADSR properly. Before, we're hearing the ADSR only when it's being affected by the LFO. Whereas we want to be able to hear both the LFO and the ADSR in conjunction, but we want to hear it also whenever I play. So what I did was, for anyone who missed that, I assigned a positive ADSR shape down here to the second modulation point on the filter, and the gate, that was what I did there. I actually brought the gate over to the gate input on the keyboard. Now the reason I did that was because when I play the keyboard, the ADSR will react to the keyboard's performance. So when I play that, it's actually a little bit hard to play because I want to play a fast run there. It just doesn't seem to keep up, you know. That's because my attack is actually a little bit off the start, and also I could do with bringing down the decay and the release. And that's also, you can hear the cutoff is close because it's modulating the second point. So we're starting to get a cool sound now. Basically, at the start of this, stream, I said that this could start to appear like a Model D, a Mini Moog Model D, because if anyone has ever seen a Model D, or if anyone has ever seen a plug-in emulation of a Model D, it looks like this. Like you have, I think you have, is it 2 or maybe 3 voltage-controlled oscillators? You have your filter, you know, your classic Mood ladder pole filter, and you have an LFO section, I believe, and obviously you have your ADSR, and it's like this. It's like basically stuck together. I believe modular synthesis was actually around way, way, way before proper standalone synths. So this is kind of like how Bob Moog designed the Model D. So there we go. We've actually built a sound, and again, if I was to repeat that, or if anyone who was watching this was to repeat that, it probably seems more straightforward straight away. If you just think about each individual model as its own thing, it just starts to make a lot more sense. You know, this is basic modular synthesis, but even still, basic can be confusing with all the wires and different modulation sources and different points. I'm just going to play around with some of the actual parameters. So if I back the attack off there, just want to demonstrate what these parameters will do in terms of what they're affecting. If I back the ADSR off the actual attack, do you hear how it went, and it slowly opened up the filter? We could get it to do that even more so. Now it's doing it less there. Remember that this is being sent to the modulation point. And because I've got it backed off, it's not going to open the cutoff as much over a time-based period. So there we go, that's what that does. Again, just like the LFO before, I could get it modulating a negative sort of tendency. So this way, it actually closes it off. It goes, bow, and then sweeps it, which is sort of another cool effect in itself. So there we go. Double click brings us back to the center. And notice how this can get quickly out of control in terms of capabilities. These have all got their own modulation sources and mod points, or CV inputs, whatever you want to call them. These have all got their own. So you could also have something else modulating the ADSR, but not just the ADSR. You could have something modulating the attack of the ADSR. You could have something modulating the rate of the LFO. That's something I do a lot, actually. We'll probably be able to look at that, because again, it's still fairly straightforward. So there we go. That's our patch. To be honest, it's quite a good bass sound. If I was to use it in a song or a production or a beat, I'd back off the cutoff. I'd bring back. It really depends on the song that you're working on, but I'd have the attack more or less quite fast. And then there's a couple of little things that I want to point out as well. So currently, if I play anything on the keyboard, doesn't matter how hard or soft I play, there is no velocity alterations whatsoever. So if you've had experience playing a piano, you'll know that if you hit a piano really hard, it's really, really loud. If you hit a piano really softly, it's not loud. As basically velocities are affecting the performance. So what you can do is, we can tell this that we want it to be velocity sensitive. And I think we also assign the velocity sensitivity to, there we go, to the VCA as well. And now, when I play soft versus when I play hard, there's a clear difference, isn't there, between the actual pronunciation of the notes. You actually get a different reaction to the filter, a different reaction to the ADSR. Everything reacts differently based on the velocity. So there's little things like that make a really, really big difference, which is nice. So pretty happy with that. Cool sound. The funny thing about this is you could use it for loads of things. You could use it for your lead. You could use it for your bass. You could use it for a poly thing, like a pad, but you'd have to add more oscillators. Basically, you would repeat the process almost when you do stuff like that, but we'll keep it simple for today's session, because I want to have a chance later on to be able to look at just a couple of the patches that come with this and have a look at some of the questions later on. But I think everyone will agree that this has been pretty straightforward. It's not like mega confusing, is it? Like individual modules, send them into each other. Think of it maybe like something that you've used a lot, like serum or pigments, or even guitar pedals routing in and out of each other. Okay, cool. And if I was to finish this sound off, Multiphonics CV-1 does come with some effects on the side here. Delay and reverb. It's actually quite a nice sounding reverb. Now don't forget that I'm using this in my DAW of choice, Studio One. So anyone using this in the DAW, I believe this might be a standalone module as well. You could just add your favourite effects in the insert section, so, you know, world's your oyster with this, really. This is starting to sound like a great patch, and again, created from scratch. Tight delay, gives it like a slapback room sound. Bring this down. Now the feedback's really short there, but obviously we've had a long delay. There we go. Cool patch. Really, really cool. So, before we move on, I want to show you a couple of ways that you can take the most basic patch and alter it. So, we've got a bass sound there, quite obviously. So, obviously we're receiving MIDI CV information from our keyboard up here, but if that's the case, I could just knock my keyboard up the octave and start to get more of a high and a higher pitch sound for a lead. Really cool. There we go. So that's me with the MIDI CV information. But also, don't forget that if you reverse engineer your patch, and I'll just hide the actual effects panel here. If you go back to your patch, you could just change things like your actual waveforms. So instead of this, what about a sub oscillator? Now we are getting really low subharmonics for a sub bass. You could layer this with the previous waveform we had, or a triangle, or a sine, or a square, and you basically can build a sub bass underneath an existing bass. You'll have to have good headphones on for this, or good studio monitors, but you can hear how subby that is. Let me bring this up again. Probably the one thing you do not want to have on a sub patch is delay and reverb. Cool. That's more or less a sub bass that we have now. Apologies if I'm shaking people's speakers all over the world right now. So, don't forget that from one patch you can create multiple things just by literally changing a waveform. Really, really cool. Something that I talked about before is how we can build on an existing patch. So currently I've just been changing parameters once I've got something that sounds cool. What I could do is, something that I really like to do a lot is I like to get something to modulate the LFO's rate. So I could do it with a number of things, really. I'm trying to think of a great way to show you, to be honest. I could maybe I could try and use an LFO to modulate an LFO. I'm thinking, is this the best way to demonstrate this? Yeah, so nice simple scenario here. I've just got obviously the existing LFO from about 10-15 minutes ago. What I like to do a lot, especially when producing a track, is modulate the rate of the LFO. So again, we're getting back into these CV and mod points. So it's still sort of simple, but we're building upon simple now. We've got a simple patch and we're building on it. So what I would do now is I'm using another LFO to modulate an LFO. So, like I said, world's your oyster. You can just do as much as you want here, but I'm telling this LFO's rate that I want it to go back and forth. In this case, I want it to go forward. If the rate was down here and I had this fully up, you would really hear the effect. So open it more and more. I can randomize it as I have it here. That just sounds really, really cool. So that's what that's doing there, is that's actually modulating that. You can remove modules in this really easily. Right click, remove. Really, really simple. So, pretty straightforward. I think everyone can agree it can get a bit confusing. But that, I'm going back to what I said before, is we have the voltage control oscillator. Think of it a bit like Serum. This is your wavetable where you go through basic wave shapes or advanced wave shapes. Our VCA is the amplifier which tells the output source that we need it to make noise to actually amplify the signal. In this case, the output doesn't go to the output though, because it needs to go to a filter where it actually affects the sound of the actual filter itself. I'll pull these back to 0. I'll go back to the wave shape I had from the start as well. And then our LFO, low frequency oscillator, creates movement. And our ADSR is a way to shape the wavetable sound. Cool. Really nice patch there. Really simple. Let's have a look now that we've created a basic sort of sound using modular. Let's have a look at what other modules comes with Multiphonics CV-1. So I was talking about these things before. I think patch info might be what it was I wanted, to be honest. Patch info is not what I wanted. Patch info is where you basically describe the sound. Probably quite a useful thing, actually, if you're creating your own sound. So I could just put down my name and put down a subby bass. And it's as simple as that. And then I think that all you would do is click save, and it would save it to your user folder, which is here. So a really good way to create your own sounds once you start to get used to them. But no, I was thinking it was a visualizer for the waveforms, but not to worry. I think people probably would be wondering, how could you make this into a polyphonic patch? I'm conscious of the time and don't want to run into things that might leave people bewildered, because I think this has made a lot of sense. And basically the way that you would do that though, and we could look into this in the future, and another great way to learn things like this is to reverse engineer, is to look at a patch and think, how have they done that? What's going where? Let me unplug some of the modulation points and the sources, what's going into what. And then you can basically, by deducting things, you can figure out what is affecting what. And like I said, for the last 15, I would like to look at some, I will come and answer some questions, and I will also look at some of the patches that come with this, and we'll maybe explain some. But yeah, you would basically stack another VCO, because this VCO here is, it's obviously one voltage control oscillator. If I wanted to play multiple notes, we have that ability if we stack them like this, but you're actually just hearing individual notes there. We want to be able to play them all at the time like a chord. You would have to have another VCO, basically. So there is the option to do that, but I don't know if we should build it. I think we should look at some existing patches. Macro points, basically a nice way to think of these, again, is go back to stuff like Serum. The macro is basically this knob would control maybe multiple parameters, and then it would be a good way to automate something like what I did before, the LFO rate. You can maybe control that with the macro in your DAW in a production session. So yeah, really, really cool. Let's finish up. I'll save that patch there and go on to another Multiphonics CV-1. And let's have a look in the patches, and I will have a look at some questions as well. But just before that, let's have a look at how they categorize them. So in our basics here, we'll probably find that these look quite reminiscent of what we created. So let's load this up. Give me 2 seconds. Need to enable the sound. So there's that patch info. This is how I was talking about how CV1 can be a useful and a good way to learn synthesis. Brassy FM patch using triangular waves. So if you look at this, reverse engineering it, there we go, triangle output, and it's going to another VCO, but it's going to the FM input. Again, don't want to get too technical, but I can explain what that means. Basically, there's quite a few different forms of synthesis, isn't there? There's, you got, well, your most common one, subtractive, which is what we just built. We've got additive, which is the opposite, but we'll not get into that for now. And we've got granular, sample-based, and we also have FM, which was like the controversial synthesis that came around in the 80s. FM synthesis means frequency modulated, still sort of sounds confusing. What that means is FM synthesis is actually where a oscillator modulates an oscillator. So that's why it creates the most unique sounds you can probably imagine, is because it's not like anything like additive or subtractive synthesis. So what's happening here, in order to create that brassy sound, experiment with different timbres by changing the tuning of either VCO. The triangle output on VCO1 is going to FM input, and basically this VCO is modulating the second VCO. Then apart from that, all we have is an ADSR, which we loaded up before, and you have to have a VCA, otherwise you're not going to get any sound at all, really, and you're not going to be able to control it with control voltage or MIDI. So that is actually fairly similar to what we did. If we look at all these basic patches, you'll see how they're quite similar. Classic VCO, low frequency oscillator, ADSR, and another VCO. And this time we're not using frequency modulation, we're using hard sync. The phase of the second VCO is reset at the rate of the signal connected to its hard sync input. That's a really interesting way. So, you know, even it's a great way to learn stuff like that. These kicks, we can understand these will probably be a lot more straightforward. So this one hasn't got control voltage assigned to the pitch. You see how this is empty? We won't get different pitch. If I wanted to, I could actually add, I could probably add pitch into a separate module. And then I could actually tune my kicks, but quite cool. But you can use cutoff to also change the pitch, but you start getting a little bit resonant. Q's bumped up again. Kick again. Another thing there, but with two state variable filters. And then down here, things start to get a little bit more complicated. The basses are a sort of, it's similar patch. Again, I think people after watching this will understand that this is not as confusing as it looks. I mean, it still can be a little bit like, what's going where? But if you think about it, it's just, again, all that can possibly happen here is an oscillator, a filter, and we have here, I can't actually quite see what that is. I think it's a bias. And then a limiter, which is just, I think that's a limiter, which is just actually limiting it's attenuating the signal. Another ADSR and a voltage called Here's some movement there, but there's no LFO, so that's being controlled by see all of the outputs are being used here. Very cool. FM again, it's cool that we have these capabilities within modular. That's a very FM based sound. There's some great sounds here. Fog of War, we've got... This is when we're getting into more advanced stuff. If anyone's seen this Venus Theory YouTube creator, he's got some really cool tutorials on... I think he actually has some stuff on this Multiphonics CV-1 synth as well. So there's some cool patches here from some great sound designers. I'm quite impressed with how the reverb and the delay sound. That's quite impressive. Let's have a look. The really confusing ones are stuff like these. So, in a nutshell, was that a fart patch? Foghorn patch. This one here, stuff like these start to run into things that wouldn't be worth looking into in this first episode of sound design sessions on modular. But basically, we're using a lot more things like noise-based oscillators here. Think of it as just basically like another form of a voltage controlled oscillator, but not within a waveform. It's a noise waveform. And then we also have stuff like this, which is really, really cool that we have these I'm not sure how you pronounce it, I'm afraid, object Q filter. This is physical modeling basically, and you can actually emulate certain sounds from real physical things and instruments. You know, we can see shapes like harps there and stuff. So a lot of these are being controlled by a sequencer. That's why if I'm not playing them, they will play on their own. And, you know, like I said before, we just keep stacking this. These are all using stuff like, they're stacking it. Let's have a look at this. Our leads will probably be quite reminiscent of what we created before. So this is a good example as to how we could have built on ours at the start, guys. This is very like ours, but it has a noise oscillator instead of a voltage controlled oscillator, and it has that physical modeling filter, which is really interesting. And on the output here, I've just noticed as well that we have controls over the reverb and the delay on the side panel. Just some really, really nice patches. Yeah, some fantastic stuff. If we look back at this, and then I'll take some questions and see what's happening in the comments section. This was the patch that we started out with. Actually, I must have actually gone overwritten it, but basically the patch that we started out with was just the really basic voltage control oscillator fed into the VCA voltage control amp, fed into our LFO and an ADSR. So anyone who's gone away from this should have learned that it's simple enough to create your own sound and then stack it and build it. And again, don't be confused with the little smaller knobs here. These are modulation sources. As long as you keep routing audio to the correct places and you can control it with your controller, you will get sound from the stuff that you add. So yeah, I'd say with sort of like last 10 minutes, I'll just go through the comments and hopefully that was useful. I think I've seen a couple popping up before. Let me have a look. Someone was talking about, can you change the cable opacity? And you can, yes. So it's just in this view menu here. This is also another really, really good way to build your patches. So if you start adding lots of modulation points, if you go to view, you can decrease the opacity of the cables there, so I can actually see what's underneath stuff like slew limiter, which I couldn't read before. So yeah, I would never recommend hidden. Just otherwise, it's just you can't see what's going where. But the lower opacity modes are really cool. And again, you can do stuff like you can reveal the effects panel and stuff. But again, you can see them up here in the output section. Any plans on adding West Coast modules like an LPG? I don't know if there is an LPG. No, I don't think there is, but you know, exactly. I think this is the first version of Multiphonics CV-1. So I think this is the first version. So who knows? Look at what happened with Arturia Pigments version 3 last week. We got everyone who owned it got a free update. So keep your eyes out. It's worth getting Multiphonics CV-1 now. Links in the description, and it's a good way of learning synthesis as well. I'm just heading over to the Facebook and Twitch comments. People talking about thanks for understanding under MS-20. That's great. Yeah, the controllers here reverse engineering presets. Oh, that's ADSR meant. Oh, yeah, very true. Very, very true. Hello again, Michael Crawford as well. Shout out. He seems to be a very loyal stream fan who always turns up. So let's just finish off with some of the best presets that came with this, to be honest. Bleepy Dreams. So again, I still think it's worth looking at these, even though they're complex in terms of their modulation sources and points. So what do we have here? This one here is using control voltage because I'm triggering the actual pitch values with my keyboard. But what's different is these are running on a sequence. So if I play one note, it's running a sequence. So we have some sort of sequencer. Yeah, okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gate CV sequences. And there can only be one reason that we have that many sequences, is because we must have that many oscillators. And in terms of that, I mean polyphony. So actually, I know it sounds crazy. This patch is not as complicated as it seems whatsoever. I'm just going to expand it here. You can drag it out. This patch has 1, 2, I'd imagine 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess we class the noise oscillator there as another oscillator point. Has 5 VCOs. And it has 5 ADSRs. And then we have mix control, which is a way of routing them. So basically, in essence, what sounds like a really complicated patch is actually building upon what we did in the first 30 to 45 minutes of this session. It's a VCO, and you have 5 of them, and they will be tuned differently to allow for different pitches, or the actual CV gate sequencer down the bottom here can alter the pitch, and it can alter the steps. That using these knobs here, you can alter. You see there, it's going A, G, F, F sharp. You can pick the pitches, so I could change these right here. It's a nice way, as well as changing a patch as well, to learn what's happening. So you can see the mod points here. This is like instant warm supremacy. And the last thing I would note with this patch is you can change the length of each individual CV gate. So it's creating a pulse with those various things. Just hopping back to the comments, these sound design sessions are happening on Mondays, and really appreciate everyone who's turned up. Apologies about the first 5 minutes of the stream, by the way, people. But really appreciate people pointing out those issues with the audio, but that's great that we got sorted. Just to reply as well, I would say if you enjoy these, hit that bell icon, because these are free on a Mondays. These are completely free streams. We have about 3 or 4 of these a week, and we have a new thing starting called the ADSR Production Challenge on a Wednesday. You're going to have a chance to win prizes, send your music in, and if you actually head over to the ADSR socials, you'll see how you can enter and what this week's production challenge is. I think it was makes some music with a vocal and just a drum beat, so go and have a look. You could be in with a chance of, I think it's like Tater will do some sort of critique with it on Wednesday, and that's something new coming to the channel. But these sound design sessions are on a Monday at 6 o'clock, and it's a great way for people to learn basic stuff, and we'll also be doing a lot more advanced stuff. Last week we did get a little bit deep with pigments, so you can go back and watch that stream on the channel if you found that you want to learn some Pigments 3 stuff, because you've just got the update, because that was an awesome free update. But I hope that people have enjoyed the video today for Multiphonics CV-1. It was really, really fun, and I had a lot of... It was really interesting to learn modular synthesis, like reverse engineering, but also if you just keep coming back to the fact that they're just individual modules that you might have seen before in stuff like Serum and Vital and all these different things. So yeah, really, really, really cool. Many thanks to the intro to, thank you to Void101, thanks to guys, my Miracle Guy saying this don't look so simple, maybe referring to the patch. I know there's a ton of modulation points going on, but anyone who finds that stuff like this looks confusing is just tune in. Make sure you watch the video back, because we had a 40 minute thing at the start where we just built a patch from the ground up, and it was a good way of learning modular synthesis in the virtual domain. People are saying that they're a little bit, their brain is collapsing in on them. It's hilarious. Okay, guys, it's been a great stream this week, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. I'm seeing some comments from Twitch. The presets sound awesome. Yeah, sound really cool. Exactly, the stereo on them is amazing. Honestly, I would love to come back and do some more stuff with this. It was great to build a basic patch, but we could definitely look at an advanced patch in the future. So hit the bell icon. The Multiphonics CV-1's in the description below. These are free every Monday. Don't forget about... When do you think modular synthesis comes into its own? Oh, this is difficult. I actually think that some of the coolest patches, by the way, are probably, when it comes into its own, is probably when you start introducing stuff like the sequences, and also adding in the noise based VCOs, because rather than just having traditional waveforms, having stuff like the noise-based filters is really interesting to add depth and stereo width to it. Someone in Twitch was talking about the stereo width on the patch. That's how you can achieve stuff like that. So it's a very, very big beast, but it's actually just like a stripped down version almost of a wavetable synth. And the modules, the best part about modular synth, although not in the digital domain, is if you unplugged all the cables, that's it. You can never replicate that again unless you have a memory, like, a crazy memory. You can never replicate the same thing again. So it's hard. It's really hard to create the same thing twice, whereas you could save presets and stuff even on hardware synths. But modular synth is all about unpredictability, and I think we had a really cool time exploring that today. So thanks very much for tuning in, guys. Anyone who tuned up late, don't worry, you can go back and watch this right from the start on how to build a basic patch and get going with Multiphonics CV-1. So I will see you guys next week. And we will be doing another sound design session next Monday. Don't forget about the production challenge on Wednesday with Tetro. And thank you so much for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great afternoon, evening, and day. And I'll see you all next Monday. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.